Hello, today we'll be speaking about part two of social influences in the creation of leisure. Last class, we were speaking about the social processes that influence leisure and many other behaviors. We spoke of imitation and modeling. Of course, a model is a person being imitated. They're a role model setting an example, and we are socially influenced by trying to imitate these models. Persuasion is similar to modeling, but it's a lot about who the communicator is, their attractiveness, credibility, um, their ability to influence effectively. Then we have conformity. This is change in a person's behavior resulting from real or imagined pressure from a person or group of people. That's peer pressure. And, it can be, we often think of peer pressure as a negative thing, but it can be positive in that, you could be feeling pressured to adopt healthy behaviors. Social comparison is when people look to others for information about themselves, especially when they're not really sure how to behave. And we do this a lot, or, in order to figure out our skills or give ourselves self esteem, a feeling of. And then there's discrimination and exclusion, which are obviously behavioral consequences of prejudice and stereotyping. And this can influence people's leisure, and it could be uh, covertly, like they don't even sort of realize that this is happening to them. For example, in choices for leisure and recreation or sport. But it can also be obviously overt in that, people are uh, experiencing a lot of prejudice, negative prejudice and stereotyping, and not feeling welcome in these spaces, in these containers for leisure. We were speaking last time of the critical influences of leisure orientations in childhood. We spoke about the influence of family and the influence of peers. Today we're going to be looking at the influence of media and technology. I'd like to comment that um, in the textbook, some of this is a bit dated in terms of technology. We're speaking still of, for example, even like television. A lot of people don't even, although people still obviously use television, but there's other ways of, watching videos and such. But there's increasingly more and more research on, this digital leisure. But this is not about digital leisure. This is about how the media and technology influences our leisure choices. So obviously, communication technology like cell phones, instant messaging, texting, whatever you want to call it, is can be positive and negative. It's used as a resource to organize and plan leisure activities. For example, research shows, for example, especially in your generation, that if you don't have a cell phone, it severely limits your ability to socialize with others because it's used to plan and organize things. I myself, I'm a bit of a slow adopter to some technology. I'm big on computer stuff related to my work, but not in my social world. And I wondered why all of a sudden people weren't calling me as much, inviting me to, a potluck or a party or an event or something. And then I realized, everyone was doing it on Facebook. So, I felt that I had to adopt the technology myself in order to plan leisure activities and socialize. Obviously, media can be in technology, social media can be a leisure activity in and of itself. And that's more and more frequent, whether that may have some positive effects, but often there aren't really tons of positive outcomes though with digital leisure sometimes, except for maybe social. It can also create leisure constraints due to reduced time for other activities and potential development of, social conflict too. Uh, there people can become addicted. I know a family who had a daughter who was maybe 13, and she was very much addicted to like just messaging and texting. Um, to the point she was doing it like she would do it all night long. She was not able they noticed that they believed it was addiction when they went on a vacation, and she was her plan didn't cover that area, so she wasn't able to text, and she didn't enjoy herself. Can create even a real problem, and also does create it does reduce your time. You don't often think of it, but even think of like television or watching videos. When you really look at how much time you spend on that, you probably could be using it in more meaningful ways. But it also is used, to pass the time. We all play our little cell phone games, for example, when we're on the bus or, waiting for something. But television and, just basically like videos in general, whether, Netflix, all that stuff is a passive sedentary leisure activity. Um, It can have positive things, like it can provide children with ideas about leisure opportunities and possibilities. My kids, for example, they used to watch like a show on CBC that was I forget what it was called, like an art show, Art Attack or something like that. And after the show was over, I knew I would actually usually watch it beforehand to see what the supplies were, so that because I knew as soon as that um, the episode was over, they would want to do the actual activity, or their imaginations. My kids play. You know in pretend land, they're playing Minecraft games, and they're being on their dragons, and all that from watching movies and that sort of thing. But there are many more negative than positive outcomes, really, when it comes to screens or just sedentary behavior in general. I have TV viewing, but obviously this is just screen time, really. But especially this is about screen time with some type of video, audio video. Increased viewing, though, is associated with many negative outcomes among children. This is especially true. So there's in adulthood, there's many more negative consequences in terms of health, that's physical and psychological well-being. But with children, there are actually developmental issues. Obviously, they are not as involved in play and physically active leisure. Um, a child might be getting an hour of physical activity a day, but if they're in front of a screen for 6, that's very negative. Children who have more screen time have reduced socialization and social skills, most likely because they're not in environments where they're socializing. They're not practicing their socialization skills. Some research says reduced imagination, which might be true, but I'm not sure about that one, as I just gave you examples of how I can see how it helps my kids' imagination. But they do have reduced positive emotions and motivation. There's a lot of depression, anxiety, lack of affect, just amotivation. Increased boredom, again, more likely because if you're not engaged in engaging, involved activities, you're just passively watching things, you might not have the ability for self-entertainment as much. And obviously, with kids, it also has a lot to do with reduced time in reading or reading ability. But again, that's changing. For example, and this was even pre-COVID. My kids, I have passwords to at least 4 different websites from the school for my kids. And obviously, with COVID, they don't do library books now, so they're always reading online. Also, I was able to motivate my child to start reading because I said, we couldn't buy Minecraft until he could read the text. And his very first, like, I found it actually difficult to get him to read. Um, and the most times he really started reading was in reading things on like video games, the script or the instructions and that sort of thing. So again, I don't. A lot of what I'm talking about might be dated research, or really research that is in a specific generation. Video gaming has obviously been looked at a lot in research, and there's many negative outcomes. I would say many of the same positive outcomes can exist. For example, um, we have like you can meet friends via video gaming. I myself play an online game, and just in my other class on community development was speaking about how the online game, my guild that I belong to, is in a way a community. And my brother-in-law has, yeah, he's a big gamer, and I know he has maintains his friendships through video gaming, and also has met new friends, and then actually met them in real life. But but again, it's screen time. It can also promote gender stereotypes. A lot of I mean, you all know what the female characters generally look like. And they even do that in Minecraft a bit, I even noticed. So there, and obviously, like, some of the games have a lot of even violence towards women. It can promote aggressive and violent behavior. My friend did many years of research on video gaming among teens, and certainly I mean, with children, seeing violence just makes it normal. And again, that might not just be video gaming anymore. There's lots of violence on shows as well, and YouTube, etc. It can discourage pro-social behavior because in the game situation, you're for example, my kids are always talking about, it's not pranking, trolling is the word. um, it's all about trolling. And on YouTube they have all these gamers trolling each other, and it's very funny. But should that behavior be transferred into reality, into the real world? And for another example is between my sons, we've had lots of problems with that. One of them thinks they're being funny, but they've burnt. In Minecraft, the my one son burnt down his brother's whole house and village, that he had built, thinking he was funny, but obviously there was a lot of crying afterwards. And you can't be obviously doing that sort of thing in real life as well. And it can be addictive. My biggest struggle in my household is about controlling the time my children spend on the tablet and on, video games and even on YouTube and all that sort of thing. And I told you my story of my addiction to Donkey Kong some years ago. So, we know that these things can be addictive. There's also the influence of media and pardon me. The influence of media and technology can also have positive outcomes. Um, we have exergaming. It does, there is maybe increased physical activity during, Wii Fit and those sort of gaming. But video gaming is still associated with reduced physical activity. Much research shows actually that Wii Fit doesn't, like, it might increase physical activity a little bit, but not that much, especially among children. It is good, though, for people who are not physically active at all. So, for example, you might be able to entice a teen who does no physical activity by, introducing them to something like exergaming, but you would then have to gradually introduce them to real physical activity. It has been shown that it's actually quite effective among older adults, especially in long-term care settings. Um, and that might be a lot of it, that that generation hasn't had as much experience with technology, so it's new and cool. I don't know, for example, is your generation going to find it that interesting? But then there'll be like all those virtual reality things, and you won't be like playing ping pong, it'll be like climbing Everest and stuff like that. um, but it does, um, it can provide some social connectedness and sense of community, like all video gaming, but it's still not as beneficial as face-to-face social interaction. In adulthood, all these social processes of childhood, like persuasion, conformity, and affiliation, continue to determine leisure behavior in adulthood and later life. We often think of all these things as, for example, peer pressure is something that happens only among children or teens. Now, perhaps you're more susceptible to it then, but it still happens in adulthood as well. But these social processes, while strong, they're not as strong as the social roles of adulthood. Leisure is greatly influenced by the social roles that you have. If you're a parent, a spouse, an adult child, volunteer, community leader, church elder, etc., these things impact more about your leisure. And people prefer often in adulthood to be doing leisure activities that are consistent with their social roles. So the major influences of leisure in adulthood are work and family. We will first speak about work. The relationship between work and leisure is reciprocal. It goes in both directions. Work influences leisure, and leisure influences work. And you can think, like, for example, a narrow definition of leisure, which, for example, doesn't include psychological constructs such as perceived freedom and enjoyment, but often we define leisure in as discretionary time or activities done outside of work. Think of the word recreation. The word recreation comes from the word recreate, to recreate. We often think in our society we have work, and then our leisure is to recreate us so that we feel like we can go back to work again. So we have often, that's sort of how our, especially Western society, often views leisure. But obviously, as you move from um, young adulthood, especially into middle age, there's a lot of influences on work. Work and work pressures really decrease time available for leisure. When you'll find, as soon as you are, having a full-time job, it really reduces your ability to do leisure, because then you also have to come home and, you do still have to do household stuff and maybe family things as well. And you might be in a situation now when you're realizing you're in that where you have, you're in school, you're working part-time, etc. You also might be starting to experience this in your life. But ironically, I guess hand in hand, work reduces our time, but it also provides an economic resource for leisure. We then have the discretionary income to go to the movies, to go out to a restaurant, to pay for a brand new running shoes, or to take tennis lessons. Work provides opportunities also for socialization and the development of friendships. This was really like both within and outside of the workplace. Sometimes your work, even can help you to meet people who are friends. And, I found that I think when you're an adult, it's actually very difficult to meet friends who are not part of your work, unless you're with like a volunteer or some sort of social organization. Um, most of my good friends in St. John's are all, profs as well. So it is, developing friendships. And sometimes, you have work even spills over into your socialization. When I go out with my husband, I go with another couple, let's say from HQR, the spouses are always like, oh, come on, no more, wait, no shop talk, because it spills over. Leisure can be used to address needs and explore interests that are not met at work, which is important. So, for example, we often all of our interests and motives and needs we have, it'd be very rare that they are all fulfilled in your work situation. So, and also choosing leisure activities might be the result of trying to help you be competent in a career. And this is especially true of young adults. For example, you may genuinely love to volunteer. You may be intrinsically motivated to volunteer. But many of you are probably not just volunteering in things that you love in your heart, just in your heart. There is a side where it's probably going to benefit your career as well. You know, you're networking, you're gaining experience, etc. Helps you to get into your like graduate school or whatever if you want to do more education. Another example is one of the biggest reasons research shows why people start golf is for their career, because many business deals actually happen on the golf course. It is actually it's most common for a lot of business things to happen during leisure activities, whether it's a restaurant or golfing is one of the most common. So, people start playing golf because they believe it's going to help them in their job. But there are influences of leisure on work. Um, leisure can impact our work situation as well. For example, being able to converse in topical leisure events can be important for social interactions. I do not normally, I do not watch sports. The only time I watch sports is if my husband is watching. But I do pay attention to like the big games, the big championships. And if I didn't watch it, I look it up. Why? Because being able to talk about these things, like in sports, for example, or other leisure things, gives me things to talk about at work. You know, when um, when the other profs, for example, or staff are talking about, who won the game, I don't want to be looking like I don't know what I'm talking about. Need to use it for social interaction. And also just competence or knowledge in a leisure activity can enhance your status among your coworkers. Um, I know all the leisure, most of the leisure activities that are done in among the faculty in HKR. And, we all know, what people are good at. And, you think of Dr. Loeffler, like, mountain climbing that, gives her cred, in our unit. And I wanted to mention, often in careers too, when you're interviewing people, you also ask about their leisure. An example is I was on the hiring committee for the last several profs that were hired. And the big question that we often ask is, well, what do you do in your free time? What are you looking for? And the reason is because, well, one, it's nice to see that someone has a balanced life, makes them healthier, more likely they can handle the pressures of this job. But it also is about, will they be happy at Memorial, and specifically in St. John's? So, for example, someone who enjoys the outdoors, who enjoy like going to festivals and outdoor recreation, they are going to enjoy themselves more and be more likely to stay in this employment because there are opportunities for their leisure. So work directly influences our choice of leisure activities. I would say probably work has more influence on leisure than the other way, but it still can be reciprocal. And there's really two theories that dominate how we think about the influence of work on leisure. The first is called the spillover theory, and this is when workers, employers, participate in leisure activities that have characteristics that are similar to their job related activities and tasks. So, meaning like the type of thing you do in your work spills over into the type of thing you do in your leisure. For example, someone might have a job as a computer programmer, and in their leisure time, maybe they play online gaming. So at work and in leisure, they are doing, um, a computer related activity. This might also happen, I see this with sometimes, people who work with children, let's say a teacher or social worker or someone, and that's their job. And in their leisure, well, what are they? Well, they're a coach. Um, they are volunteer with the Boys and Girls Club. Um, so, what they enjoy in their work is also then spilling into their leisure. In contrast, compensation theory is the opposite. It's saying that um, deprivations or a lack of something that is experienced at work are made up for during leisure time. So meaning that people will participate in activities that satisfy needs that they cannot satisfy at work. So for you're going to be doing something that is not like what you do for your employment. And this is, for example, a computer programmer. We'll use the same person. They're sitting all day at a computer, but in their leisure time, they are run every single morning, and on the weekend, they play basketball. So you can see here, they're doing something that is, at work, they're sitting, they're perhaps using their brain a lot. Whereas in their leisure activity, they want to be physically active, they want to be social, but it's about doing something that is the opposite of sitting at a computer. I would say, I also want to say that this is a little bit elitist. Obviously, a lot of the time, people who, uh, the more manual labor of a job you do, the more likely you're going to be doing something that's very different in your leisure time. So, for example, you have a factory job. Well, it's obviously that's not the type of thing you're going to be doing in your leisure. So, quite often, the more your manual labor you do, the less likely you're going to do that sort of thing in your leisure time. And also, this can have effect. Like, for example, if you're very physically active in your job, you might be doing a lot more sedentary behavior in your leisure time because of these sorts of things. Or another example would be, I know people who are gardeners and landscapers make beautiful, that's their job, make beautiful yards and gardens. But if you go into their own backyard, it's not very nice, and that's because they don't want to do that in their leisure time. The other influence in adulthood besides work is obviously family. Children are obviously a big issue with that, and obviously having a partner is also can influence. But children are the most influential. They often limit available time for personal leisure for parents. But children influence parents' leisure differently as the child ages. So parents have the greatest ability to choose activities of interest to themselves when their children are young, when they're sort of portable before walking, compared to when they're young children or teenagers. For example, with when my kids were babies, I could still take them to a restaurant more. It was easier, or to someone's house to visit, especially when they're just in that little carrier thing. You can go all around, but when they are starting to walk and run around, like it's actually can create anxiety. It's actually hard for you to even have an enjoyable time at that age. For example, I can remember going camping for a couple days with my husband's family when my son was 1. And well, it was all I did was I was on my feet all the time, just following him around because it wasn't a baby proofed area, and he's curious, and I'd wished I'd had snow fencing, that orange fencing stuff that I could have wrapped around the perimeter of our campsite, and then I could have at least sat down. But um, it's also about giving choice to them at that age. For example, when with my kids, I never bought them toys that I didn't enjoy doing as well. Or, my husband has really enjoyed, basically he purchases all things that he wished that he had learned or gotten to play with. So you can really have an influence on children. And then around, especially around age 8, they're really starting to have their own opinions of things. Um, you know, I would like to learn too. I want to try, and that can then it makes it so you're more involved in what they're wanting to do. So, parents' leisure then is primarily dictated by the young and middle-aged children. So, and I can see that definitely with myself. Most of the activities that I like to do personally as Angela don't exist right now as much. I do things that, are about for my children. I learned what Minecraft was so I could play a little bit with them, for example. Or I'm into their crafts and activities, not mine. I actually don't, although I love doing arts and crafts, I don't actually do many things that are for myself or, as gifts for others. My main crafting is I can make, really mean shields, and I make beautiful swords, and quite detailed. They're quite crafty, and they appreciate it. But again, I've got a different audience now. So there's often then blurring between leisure and family roles. It becomes family-oriented leisure. So the leisure isn't about your personal, what you would like as much, but you're doing things together as a family. And this can be, leisure is often more relational for women, meaning more social, more about social roles and connections. And this is especially for mothers. And that it can include caregiving roles. And so, in a way, what happens then is you don't really have this segmentation anymore of like free time away from other roles. It's all experienced often as one. And you experience leisure doing activities with family. Now, of course, there still is time for personal leisure. That's not to say it doesn't happen. My husband still, bowling once a week. I still at least try to go out with, do something social with friends, once a month or something, but it becomes less. So, and I want to point out that again, a lot of this is gendered. It talks about like mother and women. Certainly, family oriented leisure is increasing in importance and enjoyment among men. You see that a lot. My husband, for example, does a lot of family leisure. We don't have these sort of as much these gendered roles. But again, that is different in different families. And a lot of it is also where, your culture, where you're from, where you live, and your socioeconomic status. A lot has to do with, how gender roles play out. So obviously, there's a lot of negative impacts of family on leisure. It really can reduce time for couples to have leisure, time for them to relate to each other. Shared leisure among couples is very important. It enhances marital satisfaction. I'll just call that relationship satisfaction. You don't have to be married for this. But this really happens more in your first phase as a couple, like when you're dating, whatever, for example, before you have children. And then after the children leave, it happens again. So when you're in a family and with children, you have your own personal leisure, you have shared leisure as a couple. When you have kids, for at least that first, those 10 plus years, it's really about family leisure. And as they age and move out of the house, you again have more time for leisure activities as a couple again, and with things that you can, your own personal leisure. And I noticed that in my own marriage, right now our couple leisure time is often still related to family. We love gardening together, we do that a lot. And that's fun, but it's also kind of about keeping the household up, and we enjoy cooking together. But again, that's killing two birds with one stone, because we enjoy the cooking, but we are also feeding our kids at the same time. So there are then periods of a marriage when children are not as demanding and you do have more shared leisure. There's obviously constraints due to family inactivities, and this is about lack of time, reduced energy, and decrease in discretionary income. Whether that's, paying for example, some families, the adults don't have a lot of personal leisure because they're putting all their money into their children's sports or children's activities. And even if you have reduced time, but sometimes even when you do have the time, you have reduced energy, so you don't feel like going anywhere. For example, my husband and I very rarely make plans ever to do something on a Friday night, because at the end of the week of working and getting the kids to school, all that stuff, it's just, I feel exhausted. And, usually feel like going to bed early, not being social. So, and I think a lot of parents with young children, I mean, I think they would agree with this. Planning activities with parents with younger children, or, middle-aged children on a Friday night can be constraining, because they just need a good night's sleep to recuperate, and then maybe could enjoy their leisure time more. And lastly, recreation, specialization, and serious leisure participation is reduced due to family. For example, I don't have the time to devote as much to my personal leisure activities, so I can become as specialized. Or, it's on the things that I am specialized in have become, plateaued, I guess, and I will eventually get back to these things. There are positive things, though, on a family, of leisure on family as well. So it's, again, reciprocal relationship. Shared family leisure is very important to family relations. The family that plays together stays together. You've heard that saying before. It's how we maintain relationships. It is very important for family cohesiveness. It facilitates emotional bonding, relational identification, um, stress management. It helps with the development with kids with communication skills and feelings of support, just hanging out together. When I look back on my childhood, my parents um, didn't have that much. They were not high income when I was a child, and uh, and times were different. There wasn't as much structured leisure, but every Friday night we gathered to play games, and um, I continued to do that even when I was in university and either living in their house or when I moved out. And I can remember, I would go to my parents and have dinner, and we'd play board games. And my little sister was there. That was important for me to also maintain my relationship with my sister. And then I'd be going out, in the afterwards, out to the pub or go see a concert or something. But it's still those shared family times are really important, for that bonding, and they're often your favorite memories. Grandparenthood is also a specific time period that influences leisure. Grandparents can provide a lot of childcare, and this is happening. I specifically see that in Newfoundland a lot. Both parents are working, and the nans and pops often are the ones who pick children up from school or take them places. I did not have any family in Newfoundland, and I can remember being quite jealous when I would take my children, for example, to parent-taught groups. And often, I was the only parent. Everyone else was a nan. And their daughter or granddaughter was having leisure at that time. So grandparents can provide a lot of support. Or some grandparents are actually providing full um, time caregiving to their grandchildren, whether that's because the there might be there's a reason why the parents are not able to look after or support their children. But grandparents can be much more expressive in leisure with their grandchildren compared to when they're raising their own children. Um, and I noticed that in my parents, my father, for example, is so much more patient teaching my children things than he was with me. And I can see kind of gets a lot more uh, joy out of it even. And uh, I can see they do things that uh, you know it doesn't matter. Everything's a big exploration and an adventure. My children talk about they want Nanny and Poppy are going to come and get them, and they are going on a Nanny Poppy adventure. And they enjoy these times much more, and they maybe get to do things that their parents might say no to. So in grandparenthood, it's a lot about taking on the role of demonstrating to children that life should be enjoyed, and maybe teaching them things. For example, my father has in his life he's tried to get my mom into golf, and she does play a bit. And he tried so hard to get my sister and I to play golf, but we did not enjoy it. So he now has my children, and such joy in seeing them learn how to play golf. So teaching them the skills and things that he's enjoyed. So it's a lot about demonstrating wisdom in shared leisure with grandchildren. Um, you know, it's in your leisure with that child that you're learning things. And, I can think of my favorite memories of being with my grandparents was, you know, for example, baking cookies with my grandmother in the morning on a Saturday, and, her telling me stories of the past and teaching me how to, crack an egg, and all these little things that sometimes the parents just don't have the time um, and sometimes patience to be doing these little things. Another stage, though, of familyhood is widowhood. So, when this usually happens in older adulthood, it's, normative for someone to lose their spouse, in their older years. Obviously, though, it can be non-normative when, your spouse dies, very young. But there can be a real role constriction associated with loss of a spouse or significant family member or friend. Especially with spouses, if you are maybe in older age, they're really the person you do all your shared leisure with and provide you with a lot of companionship. So it can really narrow your leisure repertoire if you primarily participated in leisure activities together. And this is especially happens when a lot of things are couple based. Um, I noticed, with my parents, even, as people have either, they do a lot of things with couples. And I noticed that they don't maintain sometimes the same friendships after someone has lost a spouse or even divorced, because a lot of it is, couple focused. And that's especially in my parents' generation. I would say that's changing, though. But widowhood can be liberating in a way. I don't mean that it's not sad, but you can maybe it can, well, two things can happen. One, you may be used to be socially engaged, and once you lose your spouse, you become very home based, very focused on home centered activities because of loss of social connections or the shared leisure that you had with your spouse. But the opposite can happen. You can become more outgoing and more engaged with the community. The loss can be liberating. In that leisure can take on a special new meaning, a blossoming of self expression. And this can be especially true if a spouse was overbearing and determining. And this is particularly seen with women. For example, my aunt, she had very much loved her husband, my uncle, etc. Um, but everything was their life really evolved around him. Now, this was also their generation as well, being married in the 40s. But it's about everything was, he did golfing. If they did, couple activities. It was couples with, his friends and more about his work. And then she was a mother too. So most of and when she became a mother, she quit work. That was what was done back then. So slowly, most of her life revolved then around being a wife and a mother. When obviously her children were quite old, and when my uncle died, all of a sudden um, she started doing things that she hadn't done before. All of a sudden, she became a leader at her church. She joined a bowling league and eventually became the captain and a golf. She was the captain of their golf team. And all of a sudden, she told me she was no longer so and so's wife. She realized that people enjoyed her for herself and, for what she had to offer. And so it was quite interesting to see how it really kind of liberated her to explore different roles. So, various things for exam or quiz review. Make sure that you can identify and discuss all those social processes. I might give you a scenario, and you would need to tell me in that scenario what social process is going on. Is it imitation and modeling, persuasion, conformity, social comparison, or discrimination and exclusion? You need to be able to understand or identify and discuss these critical social influences on leisure. Um, Understand the concept and the difference between like socialization through leisure and socialization into leisure. So, socialization through leisure is when you're learning skills and developing as a result of your leisure activities, like learning time management because you're on a sports team. Socialization into leisure is when social agents, often parents or siblings, etc., are socializing you into something, guiding you, persuading you, pushing you into that. Make sure you understand the three types of parenting styles and how these styles can impact children's lifelong leisure. So that was um, authoritative, then there's democratic authoritative, and then there's laissez-faire. Understand what is meant by the concept of hurried children, that we're over structuring their time, especially in leisure activities, how it's creating an anxious society. Make sure that you can understand and discuss the influence of peers on leisure in childhood, and also some of the positive and negative outcomes that media and technology could have on leisure. When it comes to adulthood, obviously you need to understand the influences of work on leisure and then the influence of leisure on work. Specifically, we talked about these two theories. Make sure you understand the spillover theory versus the compensation theory. I might give you a scenario. For example, a computer guy sits at his desk all day, and in his leisure time, he writes computer games. What theory is him? Well, it would be spillover because what he does in his job is spilling over into his leisure and vice versa. Make sure you can understand the influence of family on adult leisure, both positive and negative, how leisure impacts family and vice versa. And there, a few terms for you to understand. And that concludes then our unit then on social influences in the creation of leisure.